Hey guys, Mr. Backerberg here. In this video we're going to look at complex numbers. Let's say we wanted to take a look at solving the equation x squared plus 1 equals 0. Algebraically, what we would do is we would subtract that 1 over to the right hand side, so we would get x squared equals negative 1. And then in order to get rid of the squared on the x, we would want to square root each side of our equation. Normally, we would run into an issue here because we usually say that we can't square root negative numbers. But that's where complex numbers come into play, when you're square rooting negative numbers. So what we can actually use here is what's called an imaginary number. And what we use to represent our imaginary unit is I. And I represents the square root of negative 1. So down here, when we get to the square root of negative 1 part, we could replace that with I. That's our imaginary unit. Now we are square rooting, so technically we should put a plus or a minus in front of there. So we would say that the solutions to this equation are positive I and negative I. Now a complex number is any number that involves that imaginary unit I. So we can write this as a plus b times I, where a and b can be any real number. Writing it in this form, a plus bi, is called standard form, where the real number comes first and the imaginary piece comes second. Now as we investigate I a little bit further, we know that I is the square root of negative 1, but sometimes we're going to see higher powers of I. So if we saw I squared somewhere, we know that I is the square root of negative 1. So having I squared is really like taking the square root of negative 1 and squaring it. And in here, the squared and the square root would cancel each other out. So I squared is really the same as negative 1. Now we can extend this further. We could go I cubed. Now rewriting I cubed, it's technically I squared times another copy of I. We already know that I squared is negative 1, and I is just I. So taking negative 1 times I gives us negative I. And again, we could take this another step further, so I to the fourth power is the same as I squared times I squared. We know that I squared is negative 1, so this is really like taking negative 1 times negative 1, which gets us positive 1. And this keeps going. If we went I to the fifth power, well, I to the fifth power is I to the fourth power times I. And we just got done saying that I to the fourth power was 1. And we know that I is I, so taking 1 times I is just I. And this is actually going to repeat itself as we keep going. So I to the sixth is going to be negative 1, and I to the seventh is going to be negative I. And then I to the eighth is back to positive 1. So this keeps repeating itself every fourth power of I. It goes I, then negative 1, then negative I, then positive 1. Then it repeats I, negative 1, negative I, 1. And again, it would keep repeating itself. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching.